Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Playbridge podcast. This is your host, Ruffin. Today, we're chatting with Sia Raj Purohit. At just 18, Sia published her first book, Engineering America, where she shared all about her journey discovering that not all college majors are created equal. She discovered and encouraged her peers to pursue STEM majors like she did. Since then, Sia was an early product manager at the edtech startup Udacity. She currently heads up the global edtech and workforce development group at Amazon, and she is the co-founder and general partner of Pathway Ventures, where she's investing into the future of work startups. Before we dive into our conversation today, I wanted to share that this will be the final episode for season 1 of the Playbridge podcast. It has really been such an awesome journey learning the ropes of interviewing and meeting some of the most amazing women in startups and venture capital. Most importantly, I wanted to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to the show. I just can't wait to share the lineup we're planning for season 2, and I can't wait to see you guys back here in the fall. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Hi, Sia. Welcome to the show. So excited to see you again today and to reconnect for this podcast recording. First of all, how are you doing? How's your day going? And where are you calling in from?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of you and the Slack community you've created. I'm meeting so many awesome people through that. I'm so excited to be on this episode. And I'm calling you from New York, the Amazon office, which is pretty busy today.
Very cool. Where is the Amazon office in New York?
It's on 34th and
Okay,
6th, so Midtown Manhattan.
cool. So, jumping into things, you studied undergrad at UT Austin, and when you were there, you actually wrote and published a book called Engineering America. What first motivated you to write this book, and what was the book about?
So the book was to address a personal problem I was having in undergrad. Now it's common knowledge, but at that time I was really struggling with how engineering was being taught. Computer engineering, as now everyone knows, is a very difficult thing to teach, and universities sometimes don't do a great job of teaching and showcasing like how practical and innovative those careers are. So I was a freshman, saw a lot of my classmates, especially other women in tech, start dropping out of that major and switching over to other majors. And I wanted to understand why that problem existed. Like, was it like an individual problem? Was it a systems problem? So I emailed some really famous people to ask for their opinion. And I guess when you're 18 and just like looking for career advice, a lot of people are willing to help. And so these famous people, like a Nobel laureate, a Supreme Court attorney, a professor, author, like all of these people offered to come get like coffee with me and told me these really impactful stories about how powerful engineering is and how like doable and necessary it is for the country to just progress, and how individuals that pursue it have just much more like financially rewarding lives. And so, like, basically, I started writing down those notes to share with my classmates who were also being like, why are we doing engineering? And then over time, this became a book about America's job skills gap that I published in my second year. And the idea behind the book was to show that, like, first of all, not all college majors are created equal. When you go into university, it's pretty like consistent with other students, but the majors that you pick and like the education that you receive the rest of your life really dictates the types of opportunities that become accessible to you. And so the book talked about that and encouraged more people just to get into STEM education.
I relate to that so much because I actually took a computer science class in undergrad, and the class just didn't make any sense. But like, I feel like if I had just pursued that path a little bit harder, and I went to Wake, and there was like no conversations about like tech careers. It was only like go get a finance job in New York. That was really, or consulting. Those were like the two paths that were like very marketed to us. But it's so true. Like, people, I feel like it's more talked about today, but a few years ago, it really was not even, I had no idea it was an option to pursue. So, super important topics that you were writing about. Did you study computer science and engineering during school?
So graduated from computer engineering. Very difficult couple of years, but yes, I studied that because through the research of the book, realized how important that major could be in like the building blocks of any type of career. And my career turned out to be like, how do we fix that? How do we make that education much more accessible? And how can we help like people just gain that insight that like different majors lead to different types of jobs that they may be well suited for, even if the class teaching it is not compelling. And then how can we make that class much more compelling and teach that at scale is what I work on.
Very cool. So while you were studying, you also started a business called Suit of Clubs and built it into a profitable business. You were very busy during undergrad. I'm very impressed. I was not doing any of these extracurriculars. Um, what was the business? And then did you pursue it full time after school? Why or why not?
So, Suit of Clubs, I used to think that was a clever name because it was like a collection of student organizations, like Suit of Clubs. I loved it back then, but basically the idea was that we wanted to provide student organizations the resources that they need in order to just like operate more effectively. Because as anyone who's worked in student org knows, as soon as you graduate, that information's lost. The next batch has to kind of start all over again. So that's where we started. But then we realized that the real potential was connecting employers to universities in a more easy way. So basically, as companies built up their student ambassador programs across the country, they needed like the partnership of universities to scale. So, for example, if HomeAway, which was one of our first customers, wanted to expand to UIUC, they needed student organizations there that were engaged. And that's what we provided, that kind of support and growth. But then I think the additional side benefit, which I didn't see coming, was that these organizations were looking to recruit from the universities, and we were able to help them recruit through the through the Oregon platform that we had built, and recruit beyond the GPA. So coming back to what I was doing in engineering school, like I was realizing engineering wasn't it wasn't the easiest major. Our GPAs were so low across the board, and so we didn't want companies to recruit based on that. So like our organization enabled people with lower GPAs to get employed if they had the demonstrable skills. And that again tied into this larger career narrative of mine of how do we just like help people earn a better living and like learn those employable skills.
Were you making money through that business by the like recruits and partnering students with companies?
Companies would pay us for that access. And it was good money for college student. Like basically it was easy to become profitable because we had built everything ourselves. It was me and three friends of mine. So it was a good business. And the best part of it was just helping like, actual friends land jobs in like great companies in the Austin area.
Very impactful. And then once you graduated, did you ever consider taking that full time and working on like scaling out that business, or where did you head instead?
So, right when I was getting ready to graduate, this was like the end of 2013, the ed tech space was like growing so quickly. So, I'd spent like the past like 2, 3 years of undergrad just talking about STEM education, how we need to rebuild it. And a couple of companies in California were doing the same conversation. Like these professors out of Stanford were building Udacity and Coursera at that time. And it became the year of the MOOCs. There was just so much momentum in that sector. And I wanted to be part of that. So I joined Udacity as an early employee. Udacity now very massive ed tech company, but at that time it was about 40, 50 people in like a one floor office in Mountain View. And it was just like so much fun to join there as an early employee and be part of that, like trying to create at that time, like the Hollywood of education was our goal. And over time it's evolved into like helping people like land in tech careers.
For listeners who might not know, what does Udacity do? And also, what was your first role there?
Yes. So Udacity basically works with companies to build different types of online education programs. So like Google teaches like Android development on Udacity, and there are a lot of other platforms like Amazon works with them on digital marketing. So basically, you learn job ready skills from the best players in the industry. So we Udacity works with companies to teach cutting edge skills, and the idea behind Udacity was that like a developer at Google would be able to teach Android development better than any professor because at that time curriculum hadn't even been updated to include Android development. This is 2014, 2015, and in the years since, they've graduated hundreds of thousands of students across their different programs and helped them land jobs in different tech companies. So Udacity went on to raise several rounds of funding, Series D, Series E, and has become a much bigger company now with hundreds of people. But my first job at that time, it was again 40 people. I was one of the early PMs, and my job was to build, at that time, the Georgia Tech master's degree. We brought Georgia Tech's master's degree in computer science online.
Wow.
And it's such a cool program. 10,000 people have gone through it now. And these are all like adults, typically between 25 to 35, or sometimes even 35 to 45, who want to gain that master's education without moving to Atlanta. And so bringing that kind of degree online was amazing.
What are some other courses and opportunities available on Udacity, and any like favorites that you maybe either got to take yourself or worked on yourself?
Yeah, so we worked on a lot of these courses and it was exciting. It was things like Python or data analytics and Android development, obviously, entrepreneurship, which I was a big fan of. What was really fun about Udacity is that like we spent so much time thinking about that content experience. Like we were like, how can we make this the most engaging? Like how can we like our competition was Netflix. Like we want we're like we want to get away from the shows and get people excited about learning like Python with us. And so like there were always like fun plans and quirky things in the background just to kind of keep that engagement. And so those were really fun. My favorite class was about tech entrepreneurship. We had some case studies we built with YC at that time to showcase like kind of bringing that YC knowledge to the masses. This is before YC Startup School launched and those kind of things. So that was a lot of fun.
Out of curiosity, because I love educational content and I try to make some of my own as well, what were like your key takeaways or best advice for creating like engaging content that is educational?
What was really interesting is during the years that I've been in ed tech, the amount of content, like we used to create 7-minute notes, and 7 minutes was a good time for like students to absorb a topic and then be quizzed. But that has actually dropped to about three and a half
Wow.
minutes. And I think now in the future is going to be like 1.5 minutes in terms of how much content students can consume before they need like that kind of interrupt alert or some sort of assessment to stay engaged. And it makes sense, right? We're all using like short form videos, we're watching them all the time. So, like, the ability to watch a longer form content piece becomes difficult. But then when you think about like the importance of like learning and how we can do that, like, we need to kind of, there's a balance that needs to be established. And I think that's a super cool insight.
Very interesting. That kind of scares me a little bit about our attention spans, but that's a different conversation. So when you joined Udacity, I'm imagining very early stage, perhaps seed or series A. Um, what were your biggest lessons and from working on early stage startup, and like how did you choose Udacity as like a winner? So for someone looking at joining an early stage startup, like what are some green flags and maybe red flags of joining a high growth startup?
Yeah. So it's interesting actually. So I applied to a role that wasn't related to my skill set when I first applied to Udacity. I just really liked the company. I'd been watching their talks on YouTube and those kind of things. Like I was really just impressed by the team. So I wanted an in, and at that time I didn't have a network in ed tech. So I applied to a job which was like entry level but wasn't a fit for my skill set. Thankfully, they actually entertained that application because I made like such a compelling case of why I wanted to work at Udacity. But at the end of the like 4 or 5 interviews that I had, they said that it wasn't a fit for that role, and that role was as a CS instructor. So I understand like wasn't a fit for my skill set because it's been so much time complaining about CS in undergrad. So basically, I wrote them. They rejected me, and I wrote back an email explaining how like maybe there's an opportunity we'll get to work together in the future, but I'd love to be part of that story now. And I'm like, is there any other role you can create? And the cool thing about early stage companies is that if you can make a very clear pitch about why you belong in that company and what value you can add, there's a chance that they can help create that kind of role. And so, and again, mostly only early stage companies do it. Is much harder in bigger stage companies, but I did that and Udacity actually accepted that. And they created a role for me to be like a PM, which was a huge like break in my career and also just like an awesome way to get plugged in. So, as far as advice goes, I recommend finding companies that you deeply align with from a values perspective. Because early stage company, it's almost always about values because your product is going to change so much and the markets you enter are going to change so much. So, aligning on that and making a very compelling case of why you belong in that and how it's part of your larger career journey to be part of that company at that time.
How did you pitch yourself to Udacity? Like, had you been a PM before, or was this your first PM role out of school? And just curious if you have any advice for actually pitching yourself to companies.
So at that time, I was going to be a fresh grad, but I had had like my book, which demonstrated my passion for education and the like again the values alignment with Udacity, and then I had had my startup, and having been like the CEO of the startup, I'd done things including product, and so tied those together in making that case that just hire me as a high powered generalist. I'm 21, I'm eager to learn, I'm eager to build, so that's the case I made to Udacity.
So after Audacity, you then went on to Springboard and you pivoted into a business slash strategy role. So, one, what did Springboard do and what motivated you to go work there? And then, how did you make the pivot from product management to business strategy?
So I had actually gone to grad school in the middle, and in grad school learned about like the edtech ecosystem at a higher level, and thought about the different factors. Worked in venture capital actually while in grad school and after grad school, and while I was in VC, I met the founders of Springboard. And honestly, I just really liked the founders, Gautam Tambe and Parul Gupta, both incredible people and very passionate about fixing education. See this like as a 100-year problem and 100-year company. So I really liked them. And honestly, the team was even smaller. It was like 10 to 15 people at that time. So very early stage. That was in a WeWork in San Francisco. So very tiny company. But again, I was very excited about the people. So by like having worked in venture and having gone to grad school, I kind of shifted towards the business focus. And again, my role was to be a generalist. Like I was the first business hire working with the CEO and just like different types of projects and ranging from like different markets we launch into, different verticals we get into, through like, do we move out of this office space? Do we get a new office space? Like any types of business problems. And that's what I did at Springboard.
And what does Springboard do?
Springboard is also in the online education space. It's an online boot camp to help people land jobs in tech fields. So they teach data analytics, cybersecurity, and software engineering in a 6 to 12 month long boot camp.
I guess how is it different than Audacity and any like pros or cons of each of those models and how they were each doing things?
Absolutely. So, education obviously has the spectrum about how hands on the programs are. So, on one side, there is like MOOC education, which is where Udacity started, where a lot of YouTube content lives, a lot of masterclass kind of content lives. And that's when you engage yourself and just watch videos and absorb that material. On the other side, there's like this kind of in-person boot camp experience, right? When you're in person, you're engaging directly with instructors, you're learning those important skills. So that's where like things such as like Flatiron School and those kind of things fall. Springboard was in the middle. It was very high touch, but available remote, online, accessible to everyone. So the idea was like if you can't make it to the classroom of an in-person boot camp, how can you still gain that skill set? And it's not as like passive almost as like watching like a YouTube video or learning. And like learners like of course lie on that spectrum too. There's some people who can just watch a YouTube video, become a master at like something. And there's some people who need a lot of that support. They need like a constant conversation to actually absorb content. And we want to in ed tech have solutions for every type of learner in that spectrum.
So I'm curious, one, what degree were you getting? Your graduate degree? Was that an MBA or which degree did you pursue?
I got a master's in the education field, but I wanted it to be like I knew I wanted to work in ed tech. Like I'd already done Udacity, wanted to be in the ecosystem. So I took a lot of classes between the different schools to just like kind of build my own major in terms of what does an ed tech ecosystem player need to know. And that's what led to the VC job.
And with the VC job, were you specializing in ed tech at the time?
Yes. Only ed tech and future work.
And so since then, you're not only working at Amazon, but you've also launched your own venture firm, Pathway Ventures. So love to talk a lot about that. Tell us, one, what Pathway Ventures is, what motivated you to launch it, and how you even got started with your own fund.
So, Pathway Ventures invests in pre seed and seed companies in the future of learning and work. Our big goal is basically, again, tackling this like idea about economic mobility and making careers and learning just much more accessible for people. So, the types of companies we invest in are the ones that enable people to learn employable skills, enable people to kind of just move up and earn more, and the right types of communities that help support them. So, like learning, earning, and community building are the three focus areas. And how we got started with Pathway, I first met my co-founder Taylor Stockton a couple of years ago through a grad school professor. The grad school professor taught us in different years, and he's like, "You guys should just meet. You'll have a good vibe." So basically, we had been friends for about 3, 4 years, and realized Taylor has also been a long-time operator. He's now the COO of FutureFit AI, a really cool company in the future workspace. And so Taylor and I had both been operators, and we were meeting founders maybe 6 to 9 months before those founders were meeting VC firms. And the reason for that is good founders go to operators for advice before they talk to VCs. And so they wanted our advice. I'm like, how did you do this at Udacity or this at Springboard? And so we were meeting these great founders, then introducing them to VC firms. And we're like, why don't we just start making those investments? So that's how we got started with Pathway. It was like the late 2020, early 2021. And our first LPs were basically professors who had taught us or like managers who had worked with us, and people just knew us closely. And so that's how we started making those investments.
Very cool. And you're investing out of Fund One. Awesome.
Investing out of Fund One,
Very,
and like every other emerging fund manager, demonstrating our investment track record as we think
yes,
about like building a longer career.
definitely. To that point, are there any investments that you can share with us? Any startups that you and your team have invested in so far?
So one of the companies we're excited about is called Moodle. It's founded by one of the former CEOs of Udemy and one of the former presidents of Udemy. And they are bridging the gaps that they saw at Udemy, basically about how like content it needs to be tied more to promotion cycles at companies and how like you can create better leveling systems and like more mobility within businesses. So very excited about them, great team, and just very passionate about the sector.
Generally, like for ed tech, anything like exciting that you think is going to happen over the next few years, and what has changed since you started working in the space?
Oh, wow, so much has changed obviously as the industry continues evolving. Like it's been amazing to like have been in the industry long enough to see like so many ideas be tried, some fail, some like merge into others. It's like that evolution of the sector has been super interesting. And I think the next iteration, what's been exciting is that like education and work are kind of like mixing more, which I think is super interesting. And I think the next big piece, which I'm super excited about, is like the different forms of work. Like when you think about fractional work, when you think about like apprenticeship 2.0 models and those kind of things, and that excites me and how we can get more people into those. Because like the most disheartening thing, especially in this kind of economic cycle, is when there's so many job applicants out there and they don't have the skills needed for the jobs that are open. And like that gap is painful. It hurts families. And it's just like, how can we help fix that in real time?
So, when you are looking at different investments and doing your diligence on deals, what are things that you are looking for in a startup deal, and how do you make the decision that you and your team are going to invest?
So, since we invest at the earliest stages, is typically before we have good data points about the business or the product metrics or those kind of things. So, I think the first thing we look for is just kind of like the founding team and their passion story. As you heard, I have a very deep connection to edtech, and like that's like the only thing I ever want to do. And so, having like hearing people's education stories and what drives them to build in the sector, and how it relates to our thesis and how we operate as a firm is very important. So I think that piece is the most important because it's like, is this the journey that we want to go on together, especially as like early stage investors that are very deeply connected with the business? And then from there, it's basically thinking about the problems that they're solving and just ideating together on how we can kind of tackle that. Because as I said about even Udacity back then, like the product and markets are going to change so much as you try to figure out what works. but the people who are passionate about it, in it for the long haul, and are just like resilient to those kind of market changes are the ones I think I'm most excited about working with.
So you mentioned you get a good amount of inbound deals since you have a bunch of work experience from EdTech. Do you do other outbound sourcing and any tactics for like finding the most exciting startups in the EdTech space?
So I do a lot of outbound for like interesting people that I hear about or meet at different types of events and recommendations I get from the network. There are also obviously communities that are built up in EdTech. So a couple of great Slack channels like Future of Higher Ed and those kind of things where people meet. I think what like I guess as far as like advice goes in terms of finding those pieces, I recommend all investors get so deeply connected and intertwined into the communities by creating the right kinds of events, by facilitating, supporting, that like every person you meet is interesting to you because it's part of that larger ambition to know everything about the sector. And so that's how I kind of treat like the deal flow almost. Like I just want to meet people because I find it interesting what they're doing. And then over time that becomes like different deals for Pathway.
Have you met? I feel like I need to plug a few people here in the EdTech space. Have you met Audrey Wish of Curious Cardinals? Definitely. She was recently on the podcast and super cool what she is working on. Seems like someone that would be very aligned with Pathway Ventures. So, for women who might either want to start investing, whether that's like in a venture capital role or making their own angel investments or starting their own fund like you have, what advice would you give them?
I think for people who are looking to become investors, like being very networked into the industries that they care about is important. I mean, there are obviously investors who just invest because they think it's a good deal or they're part of a syndicate or those kind of things. But in order to, I think, truly make an impact in portfolio companies, you have to be deep in the sector and connected with the founders. And to do that, like connect with the network, make friends, cold outreach at the beginning, over time, like can build that momentum, and then also think about getting advice from others. Like I think my friend Shreya Nevatia is trying this new community called the Council, which helps like female angel investors just get started. So plug into those kind of communities, but never like give up on trying to just kind of build momentum in the sectors you care about. Because it takes time, but like that piece pays a lot of returns over time.
Definitely. I feel like there's a lot of access when you just start showing up to some of these events and things, and it's really cool. I've met Shreya as well and love everything that they're working on at the council. So super cool. And as we start to wrap some things up here, can you share a female founder, investor, or leader who inspires you and just a little bit about why?
So I guess the first thing that comes to my mind actually is from a grade school. Like when I was in, I guess, middle school, my teacher would start sharing articles of Condoleezza Rice with me, just because she wanted me to be able to see like a woman and a person of color in such a prominent role in the U.S. government. And I think similarly, I feel like I'm very inspired by Hillary Clinton for again doing the same thing and just kind of trying to push that ball forward. I've read like at least 4 or 5 of her books and like very inspired by her. And then I think in the community of venture capital, I think Jennifer Carolyn, who is the founder of Reach Capital, one of the co-founders of Reach Capital, super impressive VC. She was a teacher turned VC. She says that it was accident, but I think like it was meant to be. Like she was remarkable.
Wow, that is a very cool career pivot and story. And does she invest primarily in edtech or solely in edtech?
Yes, in ed tech and future work as well. So when I was in grad school, I interned with Reach Capital, and that's when I first started working with her. And it was amazing to see, like, again, that teacher to VC pivot, and like that's still like the empathy that she has with founders, and that really like shines through.
So cool. I actually think she may have invested in Amy Molk's company, Beanstalk AI. I don't know if that rings a bell. But, anyways,
Maybe
yeah.
their portfolio has grown so much as their funds have grown.
Finally, where can people find you and where can people find more about Pathway Ventures?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is the best place probably. And Pathway has its own website and application process. We love meeting all types of founders in the sector. So yeah, reach out via LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was so fun catching up and really awesome learning more about EdTech and more about your story.
Thanks so much for having me. This is awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the PlayBridge podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And for more updates, make sure to follow us on social at Bridge Club. That's at BRYDGECLUB at Bridge Club on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.